let's see how this goes then, shall we? Dagon, the Tales of Herring Lake. For some reason it's displaying the timer in the corner. Let's get rid of that. Nobody's asked for anything insane, so we're not going to have it. Okay, options the first. Audio. A little quieter, please. There we go. That should work. Apparently this game's spoopy. Let's find out, eh? Faithful interactive adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft's work focused on story and atmosphere. You will not find difficult choices, action sequences, or inventory management here, and movement is limited to progressing through locations along with the plot. Okay.
I am writing this under an appreciable mental strain, since by tonight I shall be no more.
Okay. Interactive elements. Some of them allow you to continue your journey, others reveal interesting facts about the original short story, its historical background, and the author. Things to click, things to ask about. Some of the trivia is hidden. In order to find these secrets, focus your eyes and look for the elder sign. It's not an elder sign, but whatever. You can also access all the found facts later, available in the main menu. So, right hand button to focus. I want to turn around more. I want to have a look at this table. Okay, first job here. We've got a bottle and a
Penniless,
syringe.
and at the end of my supply of the drug which alone makes life endurable, I can bear the torture no longer, and shall cast myself from this garret window into the squalid street below. Do not think from my slavery to morphine that I am a weakling or a degenerate.
Okay.
When you have read these hastily scrawled pages, you may guess, though never fully realize, why it is that I must have forgetfulness or death.
All right. Morphine entered into use in the 19th century and was routinely administered to treat severe pain during the American Civil War and World War I. It was also sold without restrictions until 1914. Morphine became more popular after the invention of the hypodermic syringe around 1854. Well, that's later than I thought. Friedrich Serturner, who first isolated the substance, originally named it morphium after Morpheus, the Greek god associated with dreams. At the time when Dagon was published, morphine abuse, known as soldier's disease, already posed a big problem in the United States. Apparently it's pretty terrible these days as well. I can't read the letters. I can't pick up the syringe, but then again, that's not what this is about, is it?
It was in one of the most open and least frequented parts of the broad Pacific that the packet of which I was supercargo fell a victim to the German sea raider.
Oh, hello. Dagon, written around a month after the United States entered World War I. Lovecraft was actively interested in its course. He composed many poems in which he gave encouragement to soldiers and commented on the events unfolding in Europe. Tried to enlist in the army, which he mentions in one of the letters to Reinhard Kleiner. Some time ago, impressed by my entire uselessness in the world, I resolved to attempt enlistment despite my almost invalid condition. I argued that if I chose a regiment soon to depart for France, my sheer nervous force, which is not inconsiderable, might sustain me till a bullet or piece of shrapnel could more conclusively and effectively dispose of me. Letters to Reinhard Kleiner by H.P. Lovecraft. Even though he passed the physical exam, his mother prevented him from going to the war. She has threatened to go to any lengths, legal or otherwise, if I do not reveal all the ills which unfit me for the army. I Am Providence, The Life and Times of H.P. Lovecraft by S.T. Joshi. Yoshi? Good name, Yoshi, yeah. Oh man. Boom, boom, but in the dark.
The Great War was then at its very beginning, and the ocean forces of the Hun had not completely sunk to their later degradation.
I'm not seeing anything unusual in this patch of the world. Sing out if you see something.
So that our vessel was made a legitimate prize, whilst we of her crew were treated with all the fairness and consideration due us as naval prisoners.
The Huns were Central Asian nomads who established a dominion in Europe and invaded the Roman Empire in the 5th century AD. They were known as brutal, deadly warriors and masters of quick raids who also developed powerful composite bows, lassos, and early siege weapons. During World War I, the British used the word Hun as a synonym for Germans in order to emphasize their brutality. However, the term originated with the German Empire. Wilhelm II gave a speech to his troops on 27th of July 1900 before they embarked to China. Should you encounter the enemy, he will be defeated. No quarter will be given. Prisoners will not be taken. Nice guy. Whoever falls into your hands is forfeited, just as 1,000 years ago the Huns under their king Attila made a name for themselves, one that even today makes them seem mighty in history and legend. May the name German be affirmed by you in such a way in China that no Chinese will ever again dare to look cross-eyed at a German. Nice people. Their refusal to take prisoners was a clear breach of the laws and customs of war adopted during the First Hague Convention of 1899. I'm not awfully surprised. I mean, World War I was not a gentleman's war. World War II even less so.
So liberal, indeed, was the discipline of our captors, that 5 days after we were taken, I managed to escape alone in a small boat with water and provisions for a good length of time.
Oh, well done, dear chap, well done. Looks a bit oceanic out there, though. Very flat, very calm ocean.
When I finally found myself adrift and free, I had but little idea of my surroundings.
Wow.
Never a competent
Yep.
navigator, I could only guess vaguely by the sun and stars that I was somewhat south of the equator.
I must admit that I would not recognise the stars in the southern hemisphere very well.
Of the longitude, I knew nothing, and no island or coastline was in sight.
My lamp's still burning, so that's not terrible. I have oars, or at least ore. I have of the moon to navigate by. Nothing in the boat speaks to me of interesting facts or revelations. Why only one oar? I'm really worried by just the one oar.
The weather kept fair, and for uncounted days I drifted aimlessly beneath the scorching sun, waiting either for some passing ship or to be cast on the shores of some habitable land.
Looking around for one would probably do you better, matey. Now we're down to no oars. Where's the damn oar gone? Water's running low, probably. Oh, okay, there's an oar. I can't get at it. Great. And the lamp is out. Dagon was written in July 1917 and first published in 1919 in The Vagrant, an amateur magazine focused on the supernatural. The story is the first of his stories that introduced an element from the Cthulhu mythos, Dagon itself. A pagan cult worshipping Dagon later appears in The Shadow over Innsmouth, one of Lovecraft's most popular works. 1917 is also the year when he wrote The Tomb, a story about Yervus Dudley, a daydreamer who discovers a mysterious mausoleum in the woods by his house and becomes obsessed with it. Those two works marked Lovecraft's return to short story writing after he burned most of his attempts at the genre 9 years prior and decided to concentrate on poetry. Lovecraft stated that it was his friend William Paul Cook, a literary publisher and critic, who convinced him to start writing weird fiction again. Not sure whether that was a good idea or not, but, well...
But neither ship nor land appeared, and I began to despair in my solitude upon the heaving vastness of unbroken blue. The change happened whilst I slept. Its details I shall never know. For my slumber, though troubled and dream-infested, was continuous.
Okay, this has gone a bit horrible. Unusual beastie, squid-like. Boat's way too far away, past wriggly arms of doom.
When at last I awoke, it was to discover myself half sucked into a slimy expanse of hellish black mire, which extended about me in monotonous undulations as far as I could see, and in which my boat lay grounded some distance away. Though one might well imagine that my first sensation would be of wonder at so prodigious and unexpected a transformation of scenery, I was in reality more horrified than astonished.
I'm not entirely surprised. It's kind of full of squid monsters and... well, alright, they're not having a great time either.
For there was in the air, and in the rotting soil, a sinister quality which chilled me to the very core. The region was putrid with the carcasses of decaying fish, and of other, less describable things which I saw protruding from the nasty mud of the unending plain. Perhaps I should not hope to convey in mere words the unutterable hideousness that can dwell in absolute silence and barren immensity. There was nothing within hearing and nothing in sight save a vast reach of black slime. Yet the very completeness of the stillness and the homogeneity of the landscape oppressed me with a nauseating fear. The sun was blazing down from a sky which seemed to me almost black in its cloudless cruelty, as though reflecting the inky marsh beneath my feet.
We've got to get back to the boat, because frankly, this does not look like hospitable landscape. You've got nautilus, you've got squid, you've got probably an octopus upside down in the mud. This looks like an oil spill to me. Dagon seems to be inspired by Fishhead, a short novel by Irvin S. Cobb about unnatural affinities between a hybrid idiot and the strange fish of an isolated lake. Supernatural horror in literature, H.P. Lovecraft. And Lovecraft's dream about a strange island emerging from the ocean and him crawling in the ooze that covered its surface. I dreamed that whole hideous crawl and can yet feel the ooze sucking me down. In Defense of Dagon by H.P. Lovecraft. Lovecraft's interest in the topic stemmed from his aversion to fish and sea smells. In his own words, I have hated fish and feared the sea and everything connected with it since I was 2 years old, but I cannot recall what earlier experience gave me such a profound and lasting aversion to the sea and seafood. The Dweller in Darkness, Lovecraft, 1927, by Donald Wandre. And that is something akin to a trilobite, or possibly a deep-sea arthropod, but upside down. Time to get back to the boat. Straight past the tentacles. Dude, you have no idea what you're doing.
As I crawled into the stranded boat, I realized that only one theory could explain my position. Through some unprecedented volcanic upheaval, a portion of the ocean floor must have been thrown to the surface, exposing regions for which innumerable millions of years had lain hidden under unfathomable watery depths. So great was the extent of the new land which had risen beneath me that I could not detect the faintest noise of the surging ocean, straining my ears as I might. Nor were there any seafowl to prey upon the dead things.
Oof. Well, that's more than a little unusual. You'd expect some birds to be here within minutes. Volcanic eruptions sometimes result in the creation of islands, but most of them are transient and erode after some time. Some prove permanent. The floating pumice, porous rock created when superheated pressurized rock is ejected from a volcano, can move across long distances and transport barnacles and macroalgae that cling to it. In 2001, rafts of pumice created during the eruption of a volcano near Tonga in Polynesia eventually reached Australia. Pumice, of course, floats. A fishy.
For several hours I sat thinking or brooding in the boat, which lay upon its side and afforded a slight shade as the sun moved across the heavens. As the day progressed, the ground lost some of its stickiness and seemed likely to dry sufficiently for traveling purposes in a short time.
Good. Because right now you are boned.
That night I slept but little, and the next day I made for myself a pack containing food and water, preparatory to an overland journey in search of the vanished sea and possible rescue.
Well, that'll be interesting.
On the third morning, I found the soil dry enough to walk upon with ease.
Good.
The odor of the fish was maddening, but I was too much concerned with graver things to mind so slight an evil, and set out boldly for an unknown goal.
Well, there's the horizon. No sign of Jack Sparrow or anything useful like that. So let's just walk.
All day I forged steadily westward, guided by a faraway hummock which rose higher than any other elevation on the rolling desert.
I'm not liking some of these bitty bobs here, these strange and curious things. I'm just going to make sure that I'm not missing a moving about control or anything like that. limited to what you see is what you get. Something akin to a killer whale. Let's change that down a little. Should make the processor have a slightly better day. There's nothing to examine here, but I'm really thought there should be.
That night, I encamped, and on the following day still travelled toward the hummock, though that object seemed scarcely nearer than when I had first espied it.
Well, it just tells you that it's large, mate. This even more. How are we doing now? Still. Creator of the Cthulhu mythos and the fictional underwater city of R'lyeh was convinced that life could not exist at the bottom of the ocean because the water pressure would make it uninhabitable. Today we know that the darkest depths of the ocean are home to many peculiar organisms. The deepest dwelling fish have discovered so far in the Mariana snailfish and live about 8,000 meters, more than 26,000 feet below the ocean's surface, in never-ending darkness and at hellishly crushing pressures, hundreds of times stronger than those found at sea level. Upon glancing at the modern photos of deep-sea creatures such as the anglerfish, the fangtooth, or the viperfish, and the truly Lovecraftian characteristics, it's hard not to find some irony in this.
By the fourth evening, I attained the base of the mound, which turned out to be much higher than it had appeared from a distance. An intervening valley setting it out in sharper relief from the general surface. Too weary to ascend, I slept in the shadow of the hill.
You're walking on the sticky gack at the moment. It must be
I know not why my dreams were so wild that night. But ere the waning and fantastically gibbous moon had risen far above the eastern plain, I was awake in a cold perspiration, determined to sleep no more. Such visions as I had experienced were too much for me to endure again. And in the glow of the moon I saw how unwise I had been to travel by day. Without the glare of the parching sun, my journey would have cost me less energy. Indeed, I now felt quite able to perform the ascent which had deterred me at sunset. Picking up my pack, I started for the crest of the eminence.
Contrary to popular opinion, Lovecraft was not an ever-frowning, eccentric, grumpy loner. He considered himself to be a person who appreciated humour. Moreover, he would often meet with friends in his apartment or at various cafes in Brooklyn and Manhattan, At times, his social life was so intensive his work would suffer for months. There was a point when he finally decided he needed to put an end to daily meetings and loitering in New York cafeterias and resorted to hiding at home and reading with the main room light turned off, pretending he wasn't there whenever a friend knocked on his door. He also had another method of deterring his guests, which involved greeting them in a bathrobe with an unmade bed visible in the background and piles of papers scattered across the floor.
I have said that the unbroken monotony of the rolling plain was a source of vague horror to me. But I think my horror was greater when I gained the summit of the mound and looked down the other side into an immeasurable pit or canyon, whose black recesses the moon had not yet soared high enough to illumine. I felt myself on the edge of the world, peering over the rim into a fathomless chaos of eternal night.
Looks pretty dark.
Through my
unpleasant.
terror ran curious reminiscences of Paradise Lost, and of Satan's hideous climb through the unfashioned realms of darkness. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, I began to see that the slopes of the valley were not quite so perpendicular. Ledges and outcroppings of rock afforded fairly easy footholds for a descent, whilst after a drop of only a few hundred feet, the declivity became very gradual.
So not much of a eternal darkness then, was it? Hey Lumberjack, how you doing, man?
Urged on by an impulse which I cannot definitely analyze, I scrambled with difficulty down the rocks and stood on the gentler slope beneath.
Yeah, that's a nice boulder. There's some good rocks
Gazing into the Stygian deeps, where no light had yet penetrated.
there. If you gaze into the deeps, do the deeps then gaze back into you? Playing Dagon, game I got for the massive cost of no money whatsoever. And I must say that the word game is possibly
All at
a
once,
little,
my attention was captured by a vast and
overplaying
singular object on the opposite slope, which rose steeply about 100 yards ahead of me. An object that gleamed whitely in the newly bestowed rays of the ascending moon.
What we appear to have here is a slideshow with occasional ticky boxes. And it's a nice slideshow, it must be said. It's very pretty, and like you said, that boulder is it was a good boulder. That's good to know. It's good to see you're doing fine. I'm probably going to get eaten by some kind of Cthulhuid entity so far. There seems to be no branch to this story. I'm not sure there's intended to be.
That it was merely a gigantic piece of stone, I soon assured myself. But I was conscious of a distinct impression that its contour and position were not altogether the work of nature.
It's got straight edges, mate. That's man-made, or, man.
A closer scrutiny filled me with sensations I cannot express.
It's that boulder again. We're creeping along a dark valley on an unknown island in the middle of the ocean.
For despite its enormous magnitude and its position in an abyss which had yawned at the bottom of the sea since the world was young, I perceived beyond a doubt that the strange object was a well-shaped monolith, whose massive bulk had known the workmanship and perhaps the worship of living and thinking creatures. Dazed and frightened, yet not without a certain thrill of the scientist's or archaeologist's delight, I examined my surroundings more closely.
Well, okay, if that's not a big old clue. Okay. Fine.
The moon, now near the zenith, shone weirdly and vividly above the towering steeps that hemmed in the chasm, and revealed the fact that a far-flung body of water flowed at the bottom, winding out of sight in both directions and almost lapping my feet as I stood on the slope. Across the chasm, the wavelets washed the base of the Cyclopean monolith,
Cyclopean.
on whose surface I could now trace both inscriptions and crude sculptures.
Okay.
The writing was in a system of hieroglyphics unknown to me and unlike anything I'd ever seen in books, consisting for the most part of conventionalized aquatic symbols such as fishes, eels, octopi, crustaceans, mollusks, whales, and the like.
Okay.
Several characters obviously represented marine things which are unknown to the modern world, but whose decomposing forms I had observed on the ocean-risen plain. It was the pictorial carving, however, that did most to hold me spellbound.
There's not a lot of movement here. Dagon contains many themes and storytelling methods that Lovecraft developed in his later works, such as telling the story through carvings at the Mountains of Madness and in the Nameless City, journals and characters' notes in The Shadow Out of Time and The Haunter of the Dark, islands emerging from the ocean through the Call of Cthulhu, or fictional beings and deities based on real events and mythologies, the Mi-Go in The Whisper in Darkness. It's also considered the origin of the popular Cthulhu mythos. Some of Lovecraft's other stories also conclude in a manner similar to Dagon. Oh, don't do spoilers. Good. Okay, let's skip the details not to spoil the ending. That's fine. Alright.
Plainly visible across the intervening water on account of their enormous size were an array of bas-reliefs whose subjects would have excited the envy of a doré. I think that these things were supposed to depict men, at least a certain sort of men, though the creatures were shown disporting like fishes in the waters of some marine grotto, or paying homage at some monolithic shrine which appeared to be under the waves as well.
Like a big shrine like this one that we stood right in front of.
Of their faces and forms I dare not speak in detail, for the mere remembrance makes me grow faint. Grotesque beyond the imagination of a Poe or a Bulwer. They were damnably human in general outline, despite webbed hands and feet, shockingly wide and flabby lips, glassy, bulging eyes, and other features less pleasant to recall.
Oh, Norfolk then.
Curiously enough, they seem to have been chiseled badly out of proportion with their scenic background. For one of the creatures was shown in the act of killing a whale, represented as but little larger than himself. I remarked, as I say, their grotesqueness and strange size, but in a moment decided that they were merely the imaginary gods of some primitive fishing or seafaring tribe.
I don't think so somehow.
Some tribe whose last descendant had perished eras before the first ancestor of the Piltdown or Neanderthal man was born.
Not seeing it. Lovecraft would often use the latest scientific discoveries as an inspiration for his works. He really even updated his stories at the last moment in order to make sure they reflected the latest breakthroughs. Unfortunately, this method was not without its flaws. After Lovecraft's death, the Piltdown Man discovery mentioned in Dagon turned out to be a paleoanthropological fraud. Try saying that one 3 times fast. In In 1912, Charles Dawson, an amateur archaeologist, announced that he had discovered the missing link between ape and man, the fossilized remains of a previously unknown early human. Years later, they turned out to be a forgery, but by that point, the fraud had already managed to negatively affect the early research on human evolution. In the year when the discovery took place, the majority of the scientific community believed Dawson indeed had found the missing link. In 1953, Time magazine published evidence proving that Dawson was a con man. It turned out that the fossils of the previously unknown early human consisted of a human skull, the jaw of an orangutan, and some chimpanzee teeth. Whoops. That was not a good idea, was it? On with the tale.
Awestruck at this unexpected glimpse into a past beyond the conception of the most daring anthropologist, I stood musing whilst the moon cast queer reflections on the silent channel before me. Then, suddenly, I saw it. With only a slight churning to mark its rise to the surface, the thing slid into view above the dark waters. Vast, Polyphemus-like and loathsome, it darted like a stupendous monster of nightmares to the monolith, about which it flung its gigantic scaly arms, the while it bowed its hideous head and gave vent to certain measured sounds.
Okay. Definitely Cthulhu monster of some kind.
I think I went mad then. Of my frantic ascent of the slope and cliff, and of my delirious journey back to the stranded boat, I remember little.
It's those lovely boulders one more time. Up the side of the cliff we go.
I believe I sang a great deal and laughed oddly when I was unable to sing. I have indistinct recollections of a great storm sometime after I reached the boat. At any rate, I know that I heard pearls of thunder and other tones which nature utters only in her wildest moods. When I came out of the shadows, I was in a San Francisco hospital, brought thither by the captain of the American ship which had picked up my boat in mid-ocean.
Oh, that's handy.
In my delirium, I had said much, but found that my words had been given scant attention. Of any land upheaval in the Pacific, my rescuers knew nothing. Nor did I deem it necessary to insist upon a thing which I knew they could not believe.
Well, I appear to be curled up at the top end of the bed without any feet. Lovecraft was a prominent figure in the world of amateur journalism. In 1915, he started publishing his own journal called The Conservative, bad title, which included political and social commentary, poetry, short stories, and literary criticism written by him and other authors. Howard was a skilled wordsmith, but he also took criticisms to heart, which resulted in his decision to step away from writing poetry and concentrate on weird fiction again. For the first time since his teenage years, Dagon, published in 1919, is one of the short stories written during that period. Ah, I see, right. In this example excerpt from The Conservative, the master of horror fiction explains his attitude towards warfare and the idea of a world peace. Why any sane human being can believe in the possibility of universal peace is more than the Conservative can fathom. It's because you like shooting. Should the entire civilized world agree simultaneously to disarm, one or more nations would undoubtedly retain secret armaments and at the proper time take advantage of their more altruistic and less astute contemporaries in a wild career of conquest against unarmed victims. Oh dear. No country is or ever can be above for warfare until the basic impulses of the human animals shall have miraculously changed. Or, for instance, nobody is hungry anymore. That's a good start. Well, Lovecraft considered himself an atheist and absolute materialist, which he attributed partly to his early childhood interest in astronomy and science in general. In his own words, "I am indeed an absolute materialist so far as actual belief goes, with not a shred of credence in any form of supernaturalism, religion, spiritualism, transcendentalism, metempsychosis, or immortality." Well, I'm going to go for immortality myself, so see you later, Howard. All I can say is that I think it is damned unlikely that anything like a central cosmic will, a spirit world, or an eternal survival of the personality exist. They are the most preposterous and unjustified of all the guesses which can be made about the universe, and I am not enough of a hair-splitter to pretend that I don't regard them as arrant and negligible moonshine. In theory, I am an agnostic, but pending the appearance of radical evidence, I must be classed practically and provisionally as an atheist. Well. Time to leave.
Once I sought out a celebrated ethnologist and amused him with peculiar questions regarding the ancient Philistine legend of Dagon, the fish god.
Good. Dagon, or Dagon, was the main deity of the Philistines, worshipped throughout the Middle East as the ancient god of fertility and crops. In Hebrew, the word Dagon was common noun for grain. The rulers of Akkad, or Mesopotamia, chose him as the patron saint of their war conquests. He also appeared as the judge of the dead in an Assyrian poem and an underworld prison warder in one of the Babylonian texts. He is often mistakenly taken for a fish god due to the wrong interpretation of his name, as in Hebrew the word dag means fish. In H.P. Lovecraft's works, Dagon is an underwater deity ruling over the deep ones, a humanoid race with fish traits that resides in the oceans. He is worshipped by a secret cult called the Esoteric Order of Dagon. Clues in the name. Check around the room for other secret bits of information, but I'm not really optimistic.
But soon perceiving that he was hopelessly conventional, I did not press my inquiries.
The Necronomicon, oh my. August Derleth was an American writer and anthologist. He also befriended Lovecraft and published many of his works through his company Arkham House. Though he greatly contributed to the popularization of the author's works after his death, he is surrounded by numerous controversies. One of his most questionable decisions involved introducing the good versus evil doctrine. Derleth was a devout Catholic to the Cthulhu mythos, which contrasted with Lovecraft's view of the world and his approach to cosmic horror. As a result, the author's works are often misunderstood and misrepresented in today's culture. It is also worth noting that Lovecraft was never really interested in creating a mythology, and the term Cthulhu mythos was coined by Derleth after the author left this mortal plane. Lovecraft's attempts to find a job in 1925 were influenced by advice he received from friends, amongst others. Amongst others, he started freelancing for a marketing magazine where he would write announcements and commercials. Feel free to judge his copywriting skills for yourself. From an advert for Curtis Woodwork. Curtis Woodwork embraces both the usual structural units and the cleverest contrivances of built-in or permanent furniture, such as bookcases, dressers, buffets, and cupboards. Every model is conceived and created with the purest art, ripest scholarship, and mellowest craftsmanship which energetic enterprise can command, and made to conform rigidly to the architecture of each particular type of home. The cost, considering the quality, is amazingly low, and a trademark on the individual pieces prevents any substitution by careless contractors. And the hero fled, taking his unspeakable adjectives with him. Goodness me. That's an advert for a woodworking company. Are we to examine all of the cupboards then? It seems we may. These days, the word scientist is a widely accepted term, but at the time Dagon was published, it was subject to a wide debate. After the author used it in the story, critics pointed out that man of science was a more appropriate term to employ. He admitted, in defense of Dagon, that if Dagon were to be reprinted, he would indeed use the phrase they suggested. Scientist was coined as an analogue to artist, to be used when referring to those studying different branches of science. Yet in the 19th and early 20th century, scientific researchers in Great Britain and the United States were of the opinion that man of science, resembling the term man of letters, was the only proper choice. Amongst other things, it was gender-specific, indicating that science was an endeavour to be pursued by only one sex. Bit of an oops there. The term scientist became more accepted only after World War II, and man of science started fading into obscurity as an old-fashioned synonym. As well it might. Onwards we go.
It is at night, especially when the moon is gibbous and waning, that I see the thing. I tried morphine, but the drug has given only transient surcease and has drawn me into its clutches as a hopeless slave. So now I am to end it all, having written a full account for the information or the contemptuous amusement of my fellow men.
If the ladies mustn't read it. Oof, definitely not. Lovecraft hated tobacco, even though he used to smoke when he was 12 in order to look and feel like an adult. In his correspondence with his friend Reinhard Kleiner, he claims that he quit as soon as he started wearing long pants. He also had a very strong opinion about alcohol, as evidenced by his letter to Zelia Brown, dated 13th of February 1928. As for the matter of drinking, I have never tasted intoxicating liquor and never intend to, having a strong aesthetic disgust at anything which blunts or coarsens the delicate natural equipoise of the evolved human intellect and imagination. Drinking excited by personal repugnance, hence I don't drink. Let the herd do what they will. I am rather in favour of prohibition, the prohibition of any one antisocial force as well as of any other. And that appears to be that.
Often, I ask myself if it could not all have been a pure phantasm, a mere freak of fever as I lay sun-stricken and raving in the open boat after my escape from the German man-of-war.
Not impossible.
This I ask myself, but ever does there come before me a hideously vivid vision in reply. I cannot think of the deep sea without shuddering at the nameless things that may at this very moment be crawling and floundering on its slimy bed, worshipping their ancient stone idols and carving their own detestable likenesses on submarine obelisks of water-soaked granite. I dream of a day when they may rise above the billows to drag down into their reeking talons the remnants of puny, war-exhausted mankind. Of a day when the land shall sink and the dark ocean shall ascend amidst universal pandemonium.
Well, that does not look like a fun day, especially in New York.
The end is near. I hear a noise at the door, as of some immense slippery body lumbering against it.
It's not a game as I understand the game, is it?
It shall not find me. God, that hand! The window! The window!
He has lost the plot quite extensively, hasn't he, poor fellow? Story of Dagon by H.P. Lovecraft, short and sweet at a mere 52 minutes and 50 seconds. That was not quite what I was expecting, oddly enough. I was rather hoping for something with a little more interactivity to it, but that is what we have, and the price is frankly ideal at the grand sum of no money whatsoever. Take a peek on Steam if you like the look of it. If you don't, then, well, there's not a lot I can say about that point. I'm going to vanish away and have a cup of tea. I may return later with some other entertainments, but right now I'm just going to scratch my little head. And like the button says at the bottom, exit. See you lovely people later. I hope that life is making you a little less mad than our protagonist here. Have fun. See you soon.